Alrighty, and we're on to week 114 of World War II, October 31st, 1941. Winter is coming. I think they used that title for one of the World War I episodes as well. I feel like they did anyway. But go ahead and dive right in.
No winter clothes, but it's cold. Why don't they just send some? Because they don't want to admit that they're fighting in winter.
Oh my
Wait,
god.
what?
Is that really the logic that they used for why they did not send winter clothing to the front? Because of public. Oh my god.
Yeah, okay.
That is honestly a dumber reason. That is a dumber excuse than just not having the winter clothing. Also, I like the portrait here of Napoleon. Fitting.
October 31st, 1941. Many have tried to fight it. Many have underestimated it, and all have been stunned by its severity. This week it is in full gear. The rains and mud of autumn in Russia. The Rasputitsa.
Yay!
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the German advance in the Soviet Union continued on all three fronts, but all over Europe and the occupied territory, resistance was causing reprisals that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Heinz Guderian's forces are on the move this week. They take Chern the 25th, though it is just 28 kilometers from where they began their renewed drive at Mtsensk 2 days ago, and 95 kilometers to go to Tula, their goal. But he is at least finally on the move. However, after breaking the main Soviet defense line south of Tula, he now has to deal with things like minefields and fuel shortages. On the 27th, his spearhead commander, Colonel Heinrich Eberbach, takes Plavsk, 36 kilometers from Chern. They are maintaining momentum, but are moving solely on the Orel-Tula-Moscow road. They get to within 5 kilometers of Tula the 29th, but attempts to directly take the city fail since the Soviets have had time to build good defenses. And this city, one of 250,000 people, has a good armaments industry that can directly supply the defending 50th Army. Tula is still 175 kilometers from Moscow anyhow, and the 50th starts getting fresh reserves as the invaders arrive on the scene. I like this quote of David Stales. Guderian's offensive had reached its culminating point, which, as Clausewitz determined it, was the point at which the strength of the attack was superseded by the power of the defense. Indeed, the drive to Tula was in many ways the last whirlwind of Army Group Center's Typhoon. Thing is, on the 26th, Adolf Hitler decides that Tula should not be Guderian's objective, and he should instead head south to help von Weichs and his Second Army in taking Voronezh. Guderian's Army Group Commander Fedor von Bock is stunned, literally aghast at the idea of halting Guderian, though no formal order has yet arrived. However, it does the 27th, and Bock not only vigorously protests, he then just point-blank refuses to pass the order on. He just says no. No. In his diary, he writes that if Army Command wants to do it, they have to tell the Panzer Army themselves. The advance by the Panzer Army, including its infantry corps, has been started through unspeakable effort and overcoming great difficulties. If I now order it to halt, they will think me mad. 2 more telegrams come to Bock that night, ordering him to halt Guderian, both of which he refuses to pass on. Then the afternoon of the 28th comes one saying, okay, Guderian can continue to Tula so as not to lose time. By that time, though, most German attacks toward Moscow are being halted, mainly by the weather. The German 9th Army and 3rd Panzers are trying to advance from Kalinin to Torzhok and Vyshny Volochysk, but the Soviet Kalinin front holds them back, and by the 29th, they've given up the advance. Further south, Volokolemsk falls the 27th to Kluge's 4th Army, who have been advancing for 2 weeks slowly but steadily, but still, inexorably. A combination of stiff and at times desperate Soviet resistance and heavy rains brought the German offensive to a temporary halt. By the 30th of October, Operation Typhoon had lost its momentum along and east of the Mozhaisk defense line. And The infamous Russian Rasputitsa was taking hold and bogging down movement, just as it had in past
Rasputitsa.
wars. That this constituted a major problem to mobile operations was nothing new. But neither Hitler, the OKH, or the generals of Army Group Center took any serious account of the seasonal difficulties involved. Operations were simply to plow right through the autumn mud. Army Group Center is doing what they can to deal with the cold in general. A lot of food and supplies were already taken from the local peasants to supplement their own stuff over the summer. Now they're taking their winter clothing, which does leave one wondering what the peasants will eat and wear over the winter. But you're talking well over 1.5 million men in Army Group Center, and there really is no way to adequately equip them before winter arrives. For the entire offensive, fuel and armaments have been the only transport priority, what with the logistics pretty shaky as it is. The war is not supposed to last into the winter. So requests for winter clothing are not only being refused, those making the requests are told to stop making such unnecessary requests. The idea that precious transport capacity be reserved for winter clothing was seen within the high command almost as an admission of defeat and a resignation that a winter campaign had become unavoidable.
Well, it is winter. Kinda.
Result was a steadfast refusal to acknowledge the scale of the problem or do anything so.
Back when I was a wee lad, there used to be snow on October 31st on Halloween in America. Now we don't even get snow in December, so we're dying.
Substantive about it. Well, on October 30th, Operation Typhoon comes to a halt until the winter weather can freeze the ground enough for some mobility to return for the Germans. This day, though, Hitler approves a plan for the renewed drive on Moscow. This is to happen no later than November 15th. We'll surround Moscow from both north and south and encircle the Red Army there when the Germans link up near Orakova, Sueva, and Kolomna. The northern thrust will be Reinhardt's 3rd Panzers and Strauss's 9th Army, heading through Klin and across the Volga-Moscow Canal. Guderian will head northeast through Tula and Kashira and meet them east of Moscow. Höppner's 4th Panzers and Kluge's 4th Army will just head straight east towards Moscow. The Germans are still on the move, though, on the Black Sea. I mentioned last week where Stavka had ordered the Soviet forces in the south to pull back to, but by the 28th, the right wing is some 70 kilometers east of what Stavka called for, and the center and left around 35 kilometers west of it. In spite of this, the front sort of stabilizes, but the Germans are in a good spot down here. The Kharkov region is a major industrial one, and they've occupied that, and they're within striking range of Rostov, which is the doorway to the Caucasus. Well, it's a door to the Caucasus. Kerch is another doorway to the Caucasus, and by the end of October, the Soviets are abandoning it, sending troops across the Straits of Kerch to Taman. All this week, Erich von Manstein's 11th Army has been pushing them back across the Crimea to the east and west, till by today, the Soviet 51st Independent Army is holed up at Sevastopol under siege. There is important action at sea this week, too. On the 31st, the American destroyer Reuben James is torpedoed and sunk by U-552 near Iceland.
Okay, so the United States is kind of pretty much already at war.
Killing 100 American naval personnel. This is the first loss of a neutral American warship of the war to hostile action. American President Franklin Roosevelt takes no strong action for the second time this month, and the sinking is swept under the rug. He still does not want to be drawn into the war. A day earlier, though, he approves $1 billion in Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union with no interest and no repayments to begin until 5 years after the war. Actually, for the month of October, German U-boats sink 156,500 tons of shipping in the Atlantic. This is lower than September, but some U-boats have now been diverted to the Mediterranean. The Germans have 80 operational submarines at the moment. The sailors on the Reuben James are not the only non-combatants to lose their lives this week. On the 25th, Judge Alfred Wetzel elaborates on a proposal to kill Jews sent to Riga with mobile gas vans. He is the advisor on Jewish affairs in the German Ministry of Occupied Eastern Territories. He notes that Dr. Victor Brack, who we've seen before, and who was in charge of the now suspended euthanasia program, has coordinated the supply of instruments and apparatus for killing people through poison gas, and that Brack is willing to send his chemist to Riga to ensure that future executions are not done openly. They also want to avoid both Army and Special Task Force troops having to shoot dead women and children in cold blood. Many troops have expressed their unease with this. So starting this week on the 27th, experimental gassings proceed for the remainder of the week in Kalis. Jews are told that they're being transported from one house to another, but the inside of the transport van has been linked to the exhaust, so they all die from the fumes. The evolving plans for murder by gas would ensure that most future killings would be done behind a mask of secrecy, by methods which far fewer people would have to see, and in circumstances which would reduce to a minimum the chance of discovery. And on the 31st, report from the occupied Eastern Territories number 6 by Erich von den Bach-Zelewski reads, "Today, there are no more Jews in Estonia." And as those last meet their end, the week 2 comes to its end, and with it, the end of Operation Typhoon, the German drive on Moscow, though they will soon push forward again. I use a bunch of sources for this series, well, many dozens of them by now, and a whole bunch for just Operation Barbarossa so far. I enjoy David Glantz's Operation Barbarossa because he's very concise, more so than most, and here are some reflections of his to end this month of October 1941. The disasters the Stavka witnessed and the Red Army suffered in October exceeded those in June, August, and September in nearly every respect. It's funny because that's not what you think just looking at things on the surface, but it's kind of true. Worse still, since they occurred on the thresholds of Leningrad, Moscow, Rostov, and the Caucasus, once they occurred, the Stavka had no more room for maneuver. In the north, German forces held the gateway to Lake Ladoga and Leningrad. In the south, Kharkov, the Donbass, and most of the Crimea were in German hands, and Kleist's panzers were poised to strike at Rostov and the Caucasus and Stalingrad beyond. Having lost well over 1 million soldiers in the course of 1 month of fighting, the Stavka had every reason to question its forces' capacity for continuing the struggle. Well, yeah, Moscow and Leningrad look anything but secure at this point, but you know, in spite of it all, for a variety of reasons, the Wehrmacht was unable to exploit the tremendous success it achieved during the first half of October, and in all critical sectors, its offensives faltered by the end of the month. In the case of Army Group Center, the twin encirclements forced Bach to commit over half his forces, thereby losing the opportunity to exploit the empty defenses west of Moscow. Thereafter, overconfidence and utter contempt for what it thought was left of the Red Army governed German actions. They sent the 3rd Panzers to the north and the 2nd to the south, since they figured Moscow was just there for the taking. But beyond that, the Rasputitsa has arrived, and it's taken away the Germans' greatest advantage, their mobility. Once they're stuck in the mud, the Red Army can duke it out with them pretty well, as it turns out. And the trickle of fresh reserves from Siberia and the Far East arriving in Moscow is growing into a stream. In the south, Kleist's panzers have outrun their logistics, and Manstein's front just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, to sum up, I might choose to be a bit less dramatic than Glantz, considering the ocean of logistical problems the Germans have yet to solve, but here's what Glantz has to say about tomorrow. On November 1st, 1941, the Wehrmacht was indeed tantalizingly close to achieving Hitler's goal of victory over Stalin's Red Army and mastery of the Soviet Union. Whether it could achieve that goal, however, remains to be seen.
Yeah.
The U.S. has still kept actively out of the war so far. If you'd like to see what was going on in terms of isolation in the U.S. in the interwar years, you can click right here.
And that was Winter is Coming, week 114 of World War II. There wasn't really anything to talk about in this episode. There really wasn't anything. Yeah, just more of the fallout from the stuff from before. But yeah, that's that. Goodbye.